Upcoming light spoilers for Mother 3 up to the end of Chapter 1. There will be more spoilers later, but I will warn for when they come. As I've said in the past, Mother 3 is my favorite game of all time. It's such a masterpiece in charm, storytelling, lore, themes, and character. I love it so much that I got a physical copy of the fan translation. While yeah, it is a reproduction cart, it's still something I treasure. However, Mother 3 is an infamous example of a game that has never been released outside of Japan, despite the demand for it. Of course, given that it's been 20 years since it released, with the closest thing to a tease of an international release being a Robot Chicken sketch.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
I don't have a lot of hope. But just as much of a pipe dream as an international release is a remake. While I know remakes can be divisive, especially for games as flawless as Mother 3, remember, it doesn't exist and it never will. It's a hypothetical remake, and if I say it's perfect, then it is. Of course, remakes often do more than just rebuild a game with prettier graphics and higher frame rates. There's often extra content added, or, in the case of the Final Fantasy VII remakes, add a whole meta plot on top of an already busy storyline. At the time of writing, not much is known about the upcoming Ocarina of Time remake, only the reveal trailer being out. But there is still speculation about whether or not they're going to include some cut content in it, such as elemental abilities from the medallions, or any of the cut dungeons. Ocarina of Time was limited by its hardware and development time, being an N64 game. Mother 3, while eventually being released on the Game Boy Advance, had a development involving 6 console changes, from the cancelled Super Famicom CD peripheral, to the SNES, then to the N64, then to the N64 disk drive, back to the N64, and finally to the GBA. Of course, a lot of content was lost in this 14-year-long development hell, but if something like a remake was greenlit, should it be revived? Well, strap in, because today I'm tackling this question with the extremely limited amount of information about Earthbound 64 that is widely known. Let's begin. So, before we discuss whether Mother 3's N64 content should be included in a hypothetical remake, what kind of content are we talking about? Well, just to get this out of the way, I'm not going to be talking about the SNES CD/SNES version, as there's next to nothing known about it, bar the fact that it all took place in one town and starred a detective, and was similar to Animal Crossing and Majora's Mask. So, it kinda goes without saying that there is no version of a Mother 3 remake that takes elements from the SNES version, as it is, frankly, a different game entirely. So, for the N64 versions, it's a lot closer to what we see in the final GBA version. It has all the familiar pillars: Lucas, Klaus, Flint, Kumatora, Boney, Ionia, Pigmasks, Claymen, etc. A rather large development from the detective-themed Animal Crossing-like game it started as. However, Tazmily Village was likely carried over from the SNES prototype that focuses on how a single setting changes over time. This is the version that was in development the longest, starting development in late 1995 and ending in 2000, before being restarted around 2002 to 2003 for the GBA. The main story seems to be mostly the same. There are a few more characters, such as Tobacco, who is Lighter's wife and Fuel's mother, and the Kraken, seen in this trailer, both of whom are nowhere to be seen in the final game. But while Tobacco and the Kraken were seemingly just cut content, there are things like the iconic minecart scene with Lucas and Klaus that make me wonder where the hell in the game they'd be. These suggest large differences in the story or order of events compared to the final version. Anyway, I'm going to go into more detail on the differences between the N64 and GBA versions later. This was just to give an idea of what kind of differences we're dealing with. Of course, the biggest difference we're looking at is that Earthbound 64 is 3D. The world, the characters, everything. This allows for the use of many camera angles during cutscenes, like the aforementioned minecart scene. If these were adapted into the familiar GBA style, most of the cutscenes would end up quite different. This would be a huge risk, as Mother 3's cutscenes are meticulously crafted around the solid visual area, being assisted by the extra black bar at the top of the screen, further limiting the visual area and making everything seem more cinematic. This was all very intentional, and changing the fundamental design philosophy of Mother 3 would mean possibly losing a lot of what made it special. There's a huge difference between seeing Flint lash out at the start compared to watching Geralt decapitating several people in a brawl. The more gritty art style and tone of The Witcher makes that more or less expected, but in Mother 3, it feels wrong. And that's really important. It's a really important element of the game, having a perfect happy world being attacked by tragedy that shouldn't exist. Mother 3 puts up a front of being a very simple game, and it should be. The art style and simplicity represent Tazmily Village and its residents the way they should be, so all the tragedy feels out of place, because really it is. Making the cutscenes more cinematic by using more camera angles runs the risk of lessening the effect of the very intentional contrast. Of course, the other thing to worry about is how it affects gameplay. Earthbound 64 has a different kind of battle system where certain enemies were given focus, and the perspective in the overworld travel is very different. I'd say keep the same battle system and perspective from the GBA version, but a 3D remake would possibly need some of the camera sensibilities of the N64. If it took a similar direction to the Link's Awakening remake or the Tribute, it wouldn't need too much of a camera overhaul, but for it to implement elements of the N64 version of Mother 3, it may. I feel like they shouldn't, as the simplicity is so integral to the game's themes and feel. That's just me though, and I'm not a game designer, so adding more intricate camera work could possibly work, but that would probably just make the already difficult job of remaking Mother 3 even harder. And it risks making the game worse than it could be. Maybe they could put in an option to choose between the two kinds of camera systems, but good games don't put the task of making the game good onto the players. Another big difference is the art style. Earthbound 64 looked a lot grittier, whereas Mother 3 GBA is a lot more bright and colourful. This brings up the question of which art direction this hypothetical remake should take. Of course, it's primarily a remake of the Game Boy Advance game, so should it just take the regular GBA art style? Potentially similar to the Mother 3 Tribute? Well, every aspect of a good video game should serve and complement each other, interweaving to make a complete picture. This is no different for both versions of Mother 3. Everything about the final version is made to connect together, and the same goes for the N64 version. So, the N64 content is built around the art style and 3D graphics. So, the simple answer is just adapt the appropriate elements from the N64 version to the softer art style, right? Well, at that point, is it still the same content? I'm not a huge purist myself, and I doubt many fans would complain about reclaiming the lost N64 content, but it's something to consider. Itoi has long left the gaming world behind, so he can't rewrite anything to fit in this new context. But putting the content in the remake with little to no changes may actually work well. As I said earlier, Mother 3 thrives on having a simple presentation contrasted with heavy tones. So, the contrast of content made for a game that looks like this, within a game that looks a lot more like this, may actually be a point in its favor. Of course, we don't know the specifics of the cut content of Earthbound 64, so I don't know exactly how it compares to the tone of the final game, but considering what we do know, it's probably not too different from the final game. It will probably be just fine to keep the same simple art direction of the GBA game in a remake, but perhaps there could be some kind of compromise? Or use some of the Earthbound 64 art elements in the transition to 3D. I am personally of the opinion that a potential Mother 3 remake should reimagine the GBA game's graphics, instead of updating the N64 models and environments, but once again, I'm not a game designer. Just a struggling Mother fan making a video about a remake that will realistically never happen. From this point onwards, there will be full spoilers for all of Mother 3. If you have not finished Mother 3, I would recommend clicking off now. Sorry, your ticket is not refundable. Linking in well with the art style discussion, what about the character designs? If there's to be any compromising with the two different art styles, should there be a compromise for the character designs too? Well, I think most of the designs should stay the same. Specifically, I want Lucas, Klaus, Duster, Kumatora, Boney, Porky, and Hinawa to have their GBA designs, as the N64 designs look a little odd. Or at least too different to the final designs to be the same characters we know and love. Or in Porky's case, not showing up in the prototypes. Simple. As for N64 character design use that should be considered, I have Salsa and Ionia. I think Pink Salsa is fun enough to be used, which further shows the contrast with a silly cartoon pink monkey getting tortured by this evil infection of an organization. As for Ionia, this comes mainly from me wishing there was more design variety between them and gypsies. In the final version, they're designed to be simultaneously aggressively masculine and aggressively feminine, but the N64 Ionia doesn't follow this design. Also, some beta designs from the GBA version show that there was going to be much more design variety between the gypsies. I like how they can portray being androgynous in various ways, not appearing masculine or feminine at all. My ideal remake would reimagine the gypsies in a way that has their mementos being unique, instead of just a razor and lipstick for all of them. Some may disagree with me on this, but I feel making them a little more varied would make them a little more memorable. And it wouldn't make the game worse, as the gypsies can be very shallow in the GBA game. Finally, I think Flint could possibly have some of his design elements from the N64 game added to his GBA design, as N64 Flint, while looking a little grittier, still gives off a very fairy tale or storybook vibe. This is something I don't feel as strongly about, I just like N64 Flint's design. On the actual world and areas that the game takes place in, the level design of Mother 3 often features narrow walkways and slightly plain open spaces. This is similar to a lot of N64 games, such as Ocarina of Time, where levels were designed to use as little polygons as possible to fit within the limitations of the N64, and using narrow corridors to disguise unloading the previous area and loading the next one. The fact that Mother 3 has similar level design on the GBA suggests that it isn't too different between the versions of the game, so not a lot to worry about here. Another thing is Great Scale Village. It was going to be a sister village to Tazmily in Earthbound 64. It was condensed into Great Scale Beach on the GBA version, which was renamed to Cerulean Beach in the fan translation. There are a few houses here, but they're part of Tazmily Village. As for whether or not it should be included in the remake, I would say no. The lore of Mother 3 hinges quite heavily on Tazmily Village, and I think adding another village would require too many heavy changes to the story. Speaking of the story, the final version of Mother 3 has a flawless story, so I think there should be no changes. But in terms of how the story plays out, there is room for variation. One example of this is the Masked Man battle at the end of the game. Itoy has said that the original plan for this sequence was to be much darker and more disturbing, with no dialogue, and said that it betrayed the player. Despite this, however, the actual events that happened were more or less the same. These kinds of story changes, while this example was probably changed for a good reason, are acceptable. However, having Lucas and Klaus in a minecart at the start of the game just doesn't work. You can't fit that into the story. Circling back to the whole tobacco and Kraken thingamajig, what if they got added? Well, if it has no impact on the overarching story, I see no problem with including tobacco. Maybe only having her be alluded to in dialogue or something. The Kraken, however, I am less favourable to. It could maybe be part of the Tane Tane Island sequence, specifically during the ocean floor walk, which would add some personal stakes into it, as it's the fabled creature that killed Tobacco. But I have no clue where to implement it. It could replace Master Eddie, but frankly, that is something that should never happen. Also, the whole Tane Tane section is already very difficult and long, so that's gonna be a no from me. However, it could take the place of the Oso snake. It doesn't really change anything, but having the seafaring creature that killed Tobacco at the sea randomly appearing in the sewer system of Asohe Castle is a little off. I think axe the Kraken and maybe mention Tobacco as part of world building, but nothing would be lost if they didn't. Also, real quick, this makes no difference to me, but the zombies may be robotic. They're robotic in the Earthbound 64 trailer, and my impression of them when I played the first time was that they were in some way synthetic. So I don't mind if they leave it up to interpretation or lean more in the original direction. So, in conclusion, a Mother 3 remake will never happen, and this video was a product of pure cope. Bye! Okay, just kidding. Considering everything, a one-to-one remake with the philosophy of the Link's Awakening remake would be peak from the peakest peaks of Peakistan. But discussing that would be boring. I'm not an expert on Earthbound 64 or game design, so maybe someone who is one or both of them making a video about this subject would be much better. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this very specific topic of Mother 3 remakes and Earthbound 64. Despite how much of a pipe dream this all is, a fan can dream. And if you have these kinds of dreams as well, let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to see more content like this, you know, like and subscribe. Well, look forward to our next random video, and bye bye.